Israelite lack of understanding the good news. Israelite lack of understanding the good news. Keynote scripture, Acts chapter 7, verse 25. For he supposed his brethren would have understood how that Elohim by his hand would deliver them, but they understood not. But they understood not. As recorded in Acts chapter 7, Stephen was bearing witness before his accusers in the Sanhedrin council on how Israelites down through history were notorious in not understanding the good news of Yah towards the Israelite people. But not only do Israelites lack understanding of the good news, Stephen also cited down through history how Israelites persecuted the messengers of the good news, such as Moses, the prophets, and ultimately Yahshua, of which persecution Stephen himself was encountering before the Sanhedrin Council in Jerusalem. In verses 17 through 29 in Acts 7, Stephen illustrated this point in his testimony by citing the way Israelites mistreated Moses because they did not understand the good news of Yah's deliverance by the hand of his servant Moses. This is similar to persecution and rejection of the good news that is done to Israelites today who do understand, as some of you have experienced in your walk and in your witness and testimony among our people. It was quite amazing how our own Black celebrities turned on Kyrie Irving for tweeting about the Hebrew to Negroes book and documentary. Stephen states in verses 17 through 29, the account of Moses' emergence and persecution in Israel for the witness of the good news was akin to what he saw with the it's akin to what we have seen with the put down of Black celebrities like Nick Cannon, Kanye, and Whoopi, who came out with some truth about us. Acts 17, chapter 7, verse 17 through 29 states, but when the time of the promise drew nigh, which Elohim had sworn to Abraham, the people grew and multiplied in Egypt, till another king arose which knew not Joseph. The same dealt subtly with our kindred, and evil entreated our fathers, so that they cast out their young children to the end that they might not live. In which time Moses was born, and was exceeding fair, and nourished up in his father's house 3 months. And when he was cast out, Pharaoh's daughter took him up and nourished him for her own son. And Moshe was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and was mighty in words and in deeds. And when he was full 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Israel. And seeing one of them suffer wrong, he defended him and avenged him that was oppressed, and smote the Egyptian. For he supposed his brethren would have understood how that Elohim by his hand would deliver them, but they understood not. And the next day he showed himself unto them as they strove, and would have set them at one again, saying, Sirs, you are brethren. Why do you wrong one to another? But he that did his neighbor wrong thrust him away, saying, Who made you a ruler and a judge over us? Wilt thou kill me as thou didst the Egyptian yesterday? Then fled Moshe at this saying, and was a stranger in the land of Midian, where he begot 2 sons. Notice in verse 5 again, this phrase, for he supposed his brethren would have understood how that Elohim by his hand would deliver them, but they understood not. They understood not. Sometimes it is frustrating in dealing with our people's lack of understanding of the truth that they are Israelites. Even Hosea the prophet said in chapter 4, verse 6, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, because thou hast rejected knowledge. I will also reject you, that thou shalt be no priest to me. Seeing thou hast forgotten the law of thy Elohim, I will also forget thy children. Notice the prophet Hosea says, were destroyed because we rejected knowledge and have forgotten the law of Yah. In his defense before the Sanhedrin, Stephen is building a case against the Israelites, even as they were building a case against him. Stephen was building a case against the Israelites that there's a track record from the time of Moses down to his time, Stephen's time, where Israelites have rejected the messengers of Yah's good news to our Hebrew nation, even as is the case now, where Israelites very often reject the good news we bring them. Acts chapter 7, verse 18 through 23, it cites that even in the horrendous days of Israelite persecution under foreign dominion in Egypt, Yah was preparing deliverance by raising up Moses. It states in verses 18 through 23, where it says, till another king arose which knew not Joseph. The same dealt subtly with our kindred and evil entreated our fathers, so that they cast out their young children to the end that they might not live. In which time Moshe was born and was exceeding fair and nourished up in his father's house 3 months. And when he was cast out, Pharaoh's daughter took him up and nourished him for her own son. And Moshe was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and in deeds. And when he was full 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Israel. When a new Pharaoh arose, who did not respect what Joseph had done for Egypt, as reported in verse 18, this same Pharaoh began the killing of our Hebrew children by the Egyptians, as reported in verse 19. But verse 20 cites that Yah's plan of deliverance for Israel was manifested by the birth of Moses, who was cast out for his protection from his parents' house and was retrieved by Pharaoh's daughter, who adopted him as her own son, as stated in verse 21. Also, it states in verse 22 that Moshe was raised in all the wisdom of Egypt, and he excelled in word and deed in Egypt. But verse 23 says that at the age of 40, it came into Moshe's heart to identify or visit his fellow Israelite brethren, which clearly was by the hand of Yah, which implies that Moses now is identifying as a Hebrew Israelite and not as an Egyptian. This is similar as what is happening now in this Hebrew awakening, where we are returning to our true original Israelite national identity instead of American identity. Just like Moshe, as cited in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 23 through 27, which states, by faith, Moshe, when he was born, was hid 3 months of his parents because they saw that he was a proper child. And they were not afraid of the king's command. By faith, Moshe, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of Elohim than to enjoy the pleasure of sin for a season, esteeming the reproach of Messiah greater riches than the treasures in heaven, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. By faith, he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. Also, at this point in Moshe's life, Acts 7:24 through 25 reports that Moshe is now aware that Yah has chosen him to be a deliverer for Israelites out of Egyptian oppression, where it says, again, verses 24 through 25, and seeing one of them suffer wrong, he defended him and avenged him that was oppressed, and smote the Egyptian. For he supposed his brethren would have understood how that Elohim by his hand would deliver them, but they understand not. In fact, Stephen said the Israelites not only misunderstood the good news of Moses, but they persecuted on him. They snitched on him to the Egyptians, which caused Moshe to flee to the land of Midian. It's cited in Acts chapter 7, verses 26 through 29, which states, and the next day he showed himself unto them as they strove, and would have set them one at one again, saying, sirs, you are brethren, why do you wrong to one another? But he that did his neighbor wrong thrust him away, saying, who made you a ruler and a judge over us? Wilt thou kill me as thou didst the Egyptian yesterday? Then fled Moshe at this saying, and was a stranger in the land of Midian, where he begot 2 sons. It is clear from the example of the persecution of Moshe by other Israelites that Stephen is citing before the Sanhedrin on how Israelites had likewise persecuted Yeshua and now were persecuting him. Today, so is the case for us to be prepared for similar persecution by other Israelites who are bowed out and sold out to their American taskmaster. We see sites such as the Urban Apologists, where we'll see one Gentile who's invoking harassment against the message of the good news, but the vast majority of those on the Gentile station are our people that are persecuting the proclamation of the good news to Hebrew Israelites. These people like that are examples of the persecutors of Yeshua. Notice the primary persecutors of Yeshua were the religious sellouts who were ingratiated to the Roman eagle in the time of Yeshua. The religious sellouts today are very often corrupt Christian leaders, like in the Urban Apologists, who are in our community, who are ingratiated to the American eagle. And there's coming a time when those of us like Moshe will have to flee this latter-day Egypt of America to escape persecution. In Moshe's case, he fled to Midian, into the wilderness of Sinai. But in our case, it will be into the wilderness of the people. As stated in Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 35, and I will bring you into the wilderness of the people, and there will I plead with you face to face. Moshe had to flee into the wilderness of Midian. And there he came into an encounter with Yah face to face in that wilderness. Well, the wilderness of the people mentioned in Ezekiel 20, verse 35, must be a place from which Israelites can march into the land of Israel by foot, as it was when they came out of Egypt and went into the wilderness of Egypt. Today, from this testimony of Stephen about Moses, it appears we are on the brink of having to prepare to leave America, as Moshe did when he fled Egypt. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 11 through 13 states of those times of Moses and the first Exodus. It states, now all these things happen unto them for an example, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. Wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed, lest he fall. There have no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. But Elohim is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted, tried and tested above that you are able, but will with the temptation, with the trial, with the testing, also make a way to escape, that you may be able to bear it. Let us today seek the face of Yahweh for guidance and direction out of the coming purge of Israelites in America, because it's coming. When we still keep harping back to what took place in Charleston, where we were simply hearing good news, in spite of the bad news we saw there of our ancestors' tragedy in Egyptian-type slavery. And yet, when the police were called, they were all our people. Yeshua said, if you want to know what's the next phase, if you want to know where to go, like Pop Staples and the Staples singers used to sing, they would sing, I'll take you there. Yeshua is telling us today, I'll take you there. Yeshua said, seek and you shall find. Ask and you shall receive. Knock and it shall be open. Hallelujah. Beloved, I had an experience as I was concluding this lesson plan. We had a wonderful prayer Wednesday, a wonderful service with the elders and on Wednesday, and I was sitting down and I was contemplating very intensely, where is it that he has a place to meet us face to face? He met with Moses face to face out of that burning bush when he had to flee into the wilderness. He met the children of Israel on top of Mount Sinai when they fled into that same wilderness coming through the Red Sea, where Yah met them at Mount Sinai. But Yah says, you're gonna have to leave here one day at another place where I will meet you. And I know, and I've talked, and I've prayed, and I've sought, where is this? And I believe at this point, he has shown me. I want to share with you something briefly. And I want you to just bear patiently with me on this. I'm not so dogmatic to assume that I have the definitive answer to this. But at this point, I feel convinced that he has shown me something. For one thing, he did say, it'll be a place like it was when you left Egypt, where you'll flee into the wilderness. or into the desert. As we play the calming desert music and we look at that young sister in the desert video, looking back at us like, what are you waiting on? And I look at that video and listen to it a lot because I never sought out that video for that reason. That just popped up out of nowhere. But there's some sort of message in it. I could see that. I just couldn't make sense of it. Where is the wilderness of the people? And I kept contemplating what, it's not so much just that you're in a wilderness, but it's a place where you meet the Most High face to face, like Moses met him in the burning bush, like the children of Israel met him in the wilderness of Egypt on Mount Sinai. So where is this wilderness of the people? I sought, I prayed, and he revealed to me. I believe he revealed to me. He said, think about where you've been. Where were you ever in a desert where you saw me face to face? And then it floored me. There was a place where he did appear in a desert to myself, Emma Deborah, Elder Abraham ben Melech, and Elder Yachanan ben Yaakov. We were all together in the desert near Mount Nebo, where Moshe stood to see the promised land. And we saw the Mount Nebo from a distance, where Moshe stood and saw the promised land, but he couldn't enter in. We saw the mountain range area where the Apocrypha chapter 2 says that the prophet Jeremiah took the Ark of the Covenant and other furnishings of the temple in Jerusalem just before it was destroyed by the Babylonians and placed them in that mountain range. And as we were on the west side of the Dead Sea and the Jordan River, we could look over into the east side of the Jordan Valley and the range of the wilderness plains of Mount Nebo and the mountain range of a town called Madaba. And we began to see a humongous storm, lightning, thunder on top of Mount Masada. We tried to flee. We were cut off by floods on both sides. We had 3 vehicles. I had one, Elder Yachanan and Elder Abraham had one. We tried to flee. The floods cut us off going back to Jerusalem. The floods cut us off going to the Dead Sea resort of Ian Bokek. The only place we could go to was to ascend to Mount Masada again. And as we looked over the plains of the Jordan into the desert of Nebo, where Moshe had looked into the promised land, we saw out of the midst of the storms, a cloud in the midst of the thunders that came before us. And this cloud was so humongous. We were frightened by the appearance of it. We wondered, what does this mean? What is this cloud? Behind it, we saw Mount Nebo, where Moshe was in the background here. And this is the mountain range of Nebo. On the other side of that mountain range was the town of Madaba, Jordan. We had people with us who lived in Dimona who had never seen this before. And I remember Elder Yakanan said, brace yourself, everybody. We didn't know whether it wasn't a tornado, it didn't have a funnel, but it looks powerful. And then it came straight to where we were and stopped. And then we realized this was the presence of the cloud of Yahweh that had led the children of Israel in the wilderness in the time of Moshe. He gave us a preview to reveal to you that he's waiting for us. I know this, there's a lot of better places in the world to go to than this dry and desolate area here. But I must confess, not everywhere that I've been did I see the cloud of the face of his presence. He said, I will bring you into a place where I will deal with you face to face. This is where he dealt with us face to face. We were trapped. We couldn't go anywhere. We had to wait till the floods cleared. We saw 9 Israeli soldiers drowned to death in the midst of this at that time in 2018. And yet the Ruach said, you're going to need, this is what he was sharing with me yesterday and today. You're going to need a place of refuge, like Moshe. He had to flee. We're going to have to flee from this land. You already know it. The question has always been, where do you go? Listen to what Yah says in the prophecy of Isaiah, in chapter 16 of Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 16, which states these words. Send you the lamb to the ruler of the land from Selah to the wilderness, unto the mount of the daughter of Zion. And it shall be that as a wandering bird cast out of the nest, so the daughters of Moab shall be at the fords of Arnon. Take counsel, execute judgment, make thy shadow as the night in the midst of the noonday. Hide the outcast, bewray not him that wandereth. Let mine outcast dwell with thee, Moab. Be thou a covert to them from the face of the plunderer. For the extortioner is at an end, the plunderer ceaseth, the oppressors are consumed out of the land. And in mercy shall the throne be established, and he shall sit upon it in truth in the tabernacle of David, judging and seeking justice and hastening righteousness. Currently, as the cloud emanated from Nebo, Nebo is in the land of Jordan. That's the boundary of the land of Israel east of the Jordan, where the tribe of Reuben and the tribe of Gad lived. If you go to Joshua, the book of Joshua, chapter 13 and verse 9, which states, from verse 8 and 9, with whom the Reubenites and the Gadites have received their inheritance, which Moshe gave them beyond Jordan eastward, even as Moshe, the servant of Yahweh, gave them from Aroer, that is upon the bank of the river Arnon, and the city that is in the midst of the river, and all the plain of Medeba unto Deban. Medeba is today called Madaba. It is the town just on the other side of that mountain range of Nebo. where the cloud emanated and came to us from there. We have witnesses. My wife and the other elders and their wives bear witness. It was more than 7 of us that bear witness to this phenomena. We didn't understand it, and we're still learning. But all of that region on that other side of the mountain, that wilderness, was once the boundary area between what was for the tribes living east of the Jordan of the Israelites and their border with the Moabites who lived on the other side of this mountain range. And yet Yah tells the Moabites today, which is the nation of Jordan, let my outcast dwell with you. Let you be a covert to them from the face of the plunderer. In other words, Yah is saying, I am preparing them to be ready to receive you. Even now, there are those of Israel that have already started moving over there and are there now. I remember back 6 or 7 years ago when my home brother, Muhammad Ali, died in my hometown of Louisville, and in the neighborhood where he grew up, where I grew up in the west end of Louisville. When he died, I remember that the king of Jordan came to Louisville to speak the eulogy over the passing of his friend, Muhammad Ali, who was very famous in that part of the world. And I could not understand that that man who is now the king of Jordan, who sits in the city of Amman, already has a heart for Israelites to come into his country. And